In the heart of a kingdom in turmoil, where loyalty is just as lethal as the sword, one man rises. Out from the shadows, the legacy of Cain Latore echoes through the ages. A warrior shaped by pain and betrayal, facing a treacherous fate on the battlefield. In this world, hierarchy is cruel, and alliances shift as easily as the wind changes direction. As the winds of revolution blow, bringing forth conflicts that test even the strongest loyalties, our protagonist finds himself at a crossroads, fighting for the honor of his master, who with each passing day becomes more demonic, stuck in a cycle of battle and sacrifice. He has always dreamed of being more than just a pawn in the noble's war, seeking redemption while his wild past chases him like an unyielding shadow. But the noose tightens with every blow he strikes. Cain's sword seems to cut deeper than just flesh. It truly tears apart the expectations of what he could become. In this final moment, while his resolve burns like a flame, on the verge of extinction, the question arises that will resonate throughout history. Will Cain be remembered as a hero or a traitor? Destiny has a surprise in store that will shape everything. It's not just the hero Cain Latore, once nothing less than the Imperial Guard, with a past of slavery, who remains. In his last breath, he fights to protect the Emperor, who, let's be honest, made a pact with the devil and is completely unhinged. In his final moments, Cain wonders how history will remember him. He thinks about whether he'll be seen as the knight who was loyal until death or just a bastard who failed to see everything happening around him. Neither option sits well with him. Then suddenly, Halo Listin, the leader of the rebel army, appears, furious and exhausted. He wants to know why Cain changed the course of his sword in the heat of the moment. Cain, on the other hand, thinks that maybe it'd be best to simply fade from everyone's memory. After living 29 years as an orphan, he starts to believe that this fate might just be the choice he wanted. So, this guy actually talked to Rollo, who he referred to as the young master of the Duke's house, asking him not to start a pointless fight, but Rollo couldn't care less and just kept yelling. This dude only wanted to know why Cain hadn't run away, and instead chose to do what he did. Then, he had this idea to hug Cain while he was there dying, begging him to open his eyes and get up. After Cain passed on, he found himself wandering through a surreal space, a vast stretch of water under a starry sky. He wondered if this was death, but the freedom he'd been searching for didn't seem that amazing after all. While he thought about Rollo and how much he cried for him, he kept telling himself that his friend would be just fine alone. Then, out of nowhere, he gets this violent flash of energy. Suddenly, his soul turns into that of a newborn baby. He hears a man's voice welcoming him to the world, calling him Karen. As he tries to wrap his head around the situation, this old dude, who looked like a younger version of Hall, holds him and congratulates him for not crying. The old man hopes he grows up healthy, just like his youngest grandson, but wow, that shock made baby Karen burst into tears because he realized he had been reborn as Rollo's grandson. Fast forward 45 years later, we meet Karen, now 10 years old, the only son of Count Bale, who is actually Rollo's third son. So, during a history class, the teacher was explaining the modern view of society on the knight, Raimato. He explained that, even though Cain couldn't stop his master from choosing the path of evil, he remains a symbol of loyalty for standing by him until the very end. The teacher asks Karen for his opinion, and cheeky little Karen asks what the teacher's view is. The teacher gives the common perspective, saying that Grand Duke Rollo was just trying to save his friend's honor, mirroring that famous story of their friendship. But then our kid surprises the teacher with a totally different opinion, saying he thought that Alan, the devil, actually tarnished Cain's reputation because of it. The teacher is shocked, asking what he meant by that. Karen explains his theory, claiming that Grandpa doesn't forgive Cain for choosing to die instead of fighting alongside him, even knowing that it went against what Cain wanted. The teacher was stunned, but remembered that there were unofficial records saying that the fight between Alo and Cain was way too quick for two guys as skilled as they were. If one considered that Cain chose death over fighting Rollo, the kid's theory would become a lot more convincing. The professor was surprised, man, by the cleverness of a 10-year-old. He got nervous, thinking about whether he agreed with the kid or not. The Duke's gentleman could chop his head off in the blink of an eye for that kind of nonsense. As he stammered, he admitted he had never thought about it that way. Karen then starts smiling like there's no tomorrow, man. He then reveals he was just messing around, asking why the professor was so shocked. This guy loves to joke. After that, Karen goes back to thinking about his new life, confirming to himself that he was now called Karen Listen, the youngest grandson of the Listen family. It took him a little while to process the whole situation, but he finally figured out that he was reborn as Rollo Listen's grandson. He was angrily wondering how that jerk had the guts to turn him into a hero against his own will. He thought he should have figured that out without anyone saying it. Later, Karen found his dad, Bale, Alan's youngest son, praying after class. Karen got closer and asked if he was worried about the awakening ceremony. His dad apologized to him, and when Karen asked why, Bale said he was worried about passing his limitations onto him since he couldn't awaken his magical powers, unlike his uncles. Then, Karen, with a warm smile, reassured his dad, saying that honestly it didn't matter what anyone said, he was the best dad in the world. Bale got all emotional hearing his son's words and gave him a tight hug, tears streaming down his face. He then had to say he was also the best son. Then he sweetly asked what Karen wanted for dinner. So, Karen replied all excited saying, "Of course, you wanted meat, right? What else?" Back in the room, while Karen was lying there, thinking about the awakening ceremony, memories from his past life as Karen started coming back. He recalled the conversation with the young Rollo, where the idea of the awakening ceremony seemed pretty weird to him. Rollo explained explained that it was an ancient family ritual to unlock that hidden magical power. Kane laughed at the idea, showing he couldn't care less about those powers people are born with, or not. Like, he was already somewhat of a golden idiot, you know? Then Rollo mentioned that, in reality, not everyone could awaken that power, and even those who could wouldn't automatically become the head of the family. That's when Hallen tried to stir things up for Kane, talking about a grand secret that only the family head knew. Curious, Kane asked if that secret was some huge treasure or a magic book that granted wishes, and Hallen confirmed it. Kane let slip a hint of interest, explaining that, honestly, his dream was to live a chill life in isolation. After Karen laughed at the idea of that dream, Kane pretended to get mad at the teasing. Then, Rollo got serious and promised that when he became the head, he would definitely make sure to share the secret with Kane. Karen's thoughts snapped back to the present as he sat in his room, reflecting on the mana awakening ceremony. He decided that, in fact, his dad had no reason to be worried, and suddenly, a blue energy and lightning started, swirling around him as he revealed that he had actually awakened his magical power a long time ago. Dude. In another scene, Karen was with his parents, gazing in awe at a super high-tech train, almost in disbelief that it was the first time he was seeing it like this. His mom, beaming with pride, said that a big chunk of the train's technology was thanks to his dad's personal sponsorship, Bale. His dad tried to play it humble, but his mom insisted that it was really an amazing deal. Karen agreed, sincerely stating that he was super proud of his dad. He kept thinking about the train, admiring his dad who, even without awakening his mana, was an incredible guy who single-handedly managed 30% of the financial dealings for the Listine candidate. With a super caring mom and a dedicated dad, Karen concluded that they were literally the perfect parents. As the train rolled along, Karen spotted a huge castle on the horizon through the window. It was the Listen family home, the Shanghai Castle. A mix of anxiety and anger washed over her at the thought of her grandfather. He, Hallen Listen, was right there. Her anger flared instantly, thinking about how Hallen had the guts to turn her into a significant historical figure against her will. At that moment, the guy unleashed a surge of magical energy, waking her father, and that's when Karen decided she would be a constant thorn in her grandfather's side, aiming to be the biggest troublemaker in the Alisteño family history. In her mind, she swore to her grandfather that he'd better wait and see what his dear granddaughter was up to. When the train finally pulled into the station, a welcoming group was there to greet everyone. Karen's dad exchanged a few words with a guy named Henrique and expressed immense gratitude for the kindness of the Duke's family. Karen's attention was caught by the Seawolf Knights at the station. They looked different from the knights back home. She wondered if they sensed the mana she had already awakened, but really didn't care about what was going to happen with her grandfather, because it was just a matter of time, right? The family was led through the main castle, straight to a reception room, where Karen was invited to wait while County Bailey checked in with the family elders. Karen sat there bored in the big room, wishing she had asked to go to the library, you know? Suddenly, another kid in the room interrupted her train of thought, mocking her and saying the rumors were true, that Karen was indeed a bookworm since the first thing she asked upon arrival was about the library. The kid even threw some shade at Karen and her dad, saying that since she was from the Bailey line, her chances of awakening mana were slim. It'd be better for her to study and make money like regular folks did. This really ticked Karen off, and she coldly asked the kid if he wanted to fight. The kid was shocked by her reaction, but decided to gather some mana, thinking that would give him an edge. But Karen, completely calm, started to wonder if a fight was breaking out at the main house, so she released an aura of her own mana, leaving the kid almost in shock. In disbelief, he asked when and how Karen had awakened her mana, and she just smiled, saying that his dad didn't know anything either. Then Karen decided to call her cousin brother, saying they had a serious problem. He started saying that having 2 mana users in the family just wouldn't work, and that he was going to take responsibility, so her cousin should step aside, leaving the other kid frozen in fear and completely unresponsive. Karen unleashed a terrifying aura and suggested to her cousin Leo that they have a little spar, just to see how it would go. Everyone found out that Karen had already awakened her mana, and the third commander of the Knights confirmed it. Her second uncle, Raphael Listem, commented that Karen had hidden the awakening of her mana from the main house and wondered what her father's true intentions were, calling the party a failure. The party, looking shocked, confirmed he didn't know anything either. Tiles, never one to miss a beat, slapped Raphael on the back, saying it wasn't that weird for the failure not to know, since he hadn't awakened mana himself. He even called the whole situation pathetic. Then, as if straight out of a horror movie, a servant burst into, the room in a panic, immediately shouting for the young master, the famous Raphael. Raoul Listem started mumbling that there had been a serious misunderstanding. Man. Raphael realized the mess was about his kid and stood up, furious. Meanwhile, in the reception room, Leo was on the floor, looking like a defeated zombie. When Raphael arrived and saw this scene, he lunged at Karen, filled with rage, calling her a rude little brat and asking what the hell she was thinking. Right after that, Bali and Tiles showed up, and Karen, all chill, said Leo had been a real idiot with his dad. Then Karen turned to her uncle and asked a question. Dude, would he have kept quiet if he were in his shoes? Raphael fired off, claiming Karen was spouting nonsense. He grabbed Karen again and turned to the dance floor, telling him to shut up and throwing it in his face that all this mess was because of his crappy upbringing. But then, the head butler, who was already fed up, jumped in and told everyone to knock it off, saying that the master of the house, Hallo Liston, was going to sort everything out. Raphael had to let Karen go and let me. Tell you, it wasn't easy. Meanwhile, the dance floor ran up to his son to check on him, and Karen assured them he was was doing fine. After that, the head butler called everyone to go see the master of the house. As they walked down the hallway, Karen thought it had been ages since he last saw Rael. When they entered the office, Rael was chilling behind the desk and shot a direct question at Karen. Why he made such a mess right when he got there. The dance floor even tried to defend his son, but Rael cut him off immediately, saying he hadn't asked him anything and wanted to hear the truth from Karen himself. Hollow Listine looked at Karen and said he knew he wasn't dumb enough to mess up without thinking about the consequences, and he wanted him to explain exactly what happened. Still in shock, Karen thought Hollow Listine was being really gentlemanly by listening to him before throwing down. So, our kid repeated his answer, saying it was Leo who insulted his dad. That's when Raphael blew up again, calling Karen a liar and demanding he tell the truth, with zero patience. Rael slammed his fist on the desk and yelled at Raphael, asking how he had the guts to raise his voice in his presence. Raphael, getting all personal, apologized to Rael, who then decided to call Leo in to confirm what went down, ordering Heinrich to bring him in as soon as he was done with his treatment. But before all that, Hollow Listine focused on Karen, saying the issue of the insult wasn't all he wanted to ask. Karen already anticipated his grandfather's question and happily said if he wanted to know about the mana, he had awakened it 3 years ago, leaving everyone in shock. Hollow Listine, looking like he just got punched in the face, asked why he kept that from his dad, questioning how this kid managed to awaken mana without anyone finding out. Karen really went for it, not realizing he was mana until he read a book later. When their grandpa pressed him about what happened, Karen just smiled innocently and said she wanted to keep it a secret. He then added that secrets are fun and way cooler because the knights in their region have no clue what's going on. Hollow Listine asked if that was really the case, and Karen happily confirmed it. At that exact moment, Leo showed up all wrapped up in bandages, and Rollo wasted no time asking if he really insulted his uncle. Then the guy put on a whole theater show, dramatically lamenting Leo's insult to his dad, calling him a vulgar guy who only cares about money, without any remorse. He kept going, describing his own dad as incompetent, questioning how much pain he'd feel if his dad died without seeing the light of day. He wrapped up the performance by admitting that, even with all that, he shouldn't have hit Leo and that he messed up big time. Leo, horrified by this whole act, was shaking his head vigorously in denial. In that tense moment, Karen flexed a bit and unleashed a burst of energy just to intimidate her cousin. Hollow Listine, totally calm, turned to Leo and asked if what Karen said was true. Leo, with fear written all over his face, ended up admitting it. After hearing that confession, Rollo decided that since the awakening ceremony was the next day, he'd postpone both their punishments until after the ceremony and ordered them to go rest. Later that night, Rollo called his servant Henry and asked what he thought of the son of Bailey Heinrich. With his diplomacy game on point, Henry replied that he found the kid had a few traits that might interest the master of the house. Rollo agreed, describing Karen as an intriguing boy, not just because he woke up human on his own and held onto that bombshell for 3 years, but also because he subtly critiqued the knights of his dad's territory, which Rollo saw as a sign that he himself had sidelined the festivities. He thought Hollow Listine was a bit out there, but Hollow insisted that this grandson was something special. Hollow Listine said they would find out Karen's true nature during the ceremony the next day, buzzing with curiosity about whether he would make it through the event. And what could he gain from this? Later that night, the whole family gathered in the backyard, preparing for the ceremony. Karen noticed the family elders draped in their robes and felt that immense power, even though they were now retired. Our hero glanced around and saw that all the family members were present, including Tiles and his daughter Leone, along with Raphael and his son Leo. He realized that this ceremony was way more significant than he had thought. In the midst of the crowd, there was a stone platform topped with a large black rock, which Karen instantly recognized as the famous Oath Stone. Just then, Rollo showed up and announced that the eye-opening ritual was about to begin, saying that when Karen stepped through the crack opened by the Oath Stone, he would enter a world that the stone would reveal to him. He explained that this world would be different for each person, and that the ritual wouldn't finish until Karen destroyed that world with the clear vision weapon he would find there. After Karen confirmed he was good to go, Rollo activated the Oath Stone with a necklace, and a wave of blue energy shot out, opening a bright crack in the air. Meanwhile, Bailey was holding his son's shoulder, all anxious, asking if he was scared and if he would really be okay. Karen reassured his dad that he'd be fine and promised he'd come back. He was thinking about the mission ahead, to destroy the world with a weapon he was about to earn, and convinced himself it was going to be a piece of cake, because breaking things had always been his specialty. In the back of his mind, Rollo wished with all his heart that his grandson would overcome his fear. As soon as Karen stepped through the crack, he found himself in a place that felt eerily familiar. The Imperial Palace was on fire, and the bodies of his fallen companions were scattered around. He got furious and wondered why the stone was showing him these painful memories, as if it wanted him to feel guilty for his friends' deaths. Then, he heard a mysterious voice calling his world, tragic and desolate, mentioning that he was the child of the Blue Wolf. The voice said it was time for the pact, and that he would fulfill what he promised to his ancestor. Karen, all curious and suspicious, asked if the voice belonged to a demon, but the voice denied it, saying that demons wouldn't dare touch the blood running through his veins. It challenged the protagonist to face his fear and ascend to the throne, where what he desired awaited him. When Karen reached the throne that the Emperor wanted to protect at all costs, he climbed the stairs feeling like he was walking over corpses, realizing he never imagined this was the cause of all the deaths. There lay his old weapon. The voice then greeted him as the representative of the Blue Wolf clan, claiming that this was his weapon. Karen recognized the demonic sword Ruin, which had been given to him by the Emperor. The voice asked him to infuse the sword with mana, but Karen protested that the sword consumed the soul of anyone who wielded it. The voice tried to calm him down, saying that the demonic will that used to reside in the sword had been eradicated by his grandfather, and that what he saw was just a distorted form of the curse, and that he alone had the power to awaken it. Karen hesitated, wondering if it was safe to touch the sword, afraid of becoming the same person who did the Emperor's bidding and took lives. In that moment, the voice echoed in his mind, urging him to confront his fear. Then, Karen finally grasped what the unusual kindness of the voice truly meant. The ritual to open his eyes wasn't just about getting a weapon, but about helping the heir overcome his greatest fear. With that thought in mind, Karen confidently reached out toward Iki, his sword. As soon as he grasped it, a wave of blue energy that he recognized as the mana of clear sight flooded him, and the shape of the sword began to change. The mysterious voice said it didn't know why the sword appeared in its previous form, Ruin, but explained that this sword originally belonged to his ancestor, Rael. The voice remarked that the reason this sword wasn't recorded in history, unlike the other sword taken by Hallow Liston, was that its power had a completely different nature from that of the family. The boy felt an intense pain as the mana from the sword etched itself into his body, but the voice urged him to endure, feeling the mana boiling within him. He asked the voice what the true name of the sword was. The voice revealed that it was called Guillotine, the blade that beheaded a whole bunch of demons and devoured their powers. So much so that even the demons themselves began to forget about her out of fear. Karen found herself pondering the new name for her weapon. A voice chimed in, suggesting that a sword resembling the darkness of the deep sea would fit her destiny perfectly. Uncertain, she asked who the voice was, wondering if it could be the Blue Dragon, the guardian of her home. But the voice responded that he didn't yet have enough power to bear her true name, and invited her to learn it someday in the north. See, when she was strong enough to rule the oceans. Then the crazy guy chimed in, asking how to get out of that world. Ozzy and the grandmother revealed that he already knew the answer. Karen finally realized she needed to destroy the world, just like she was told at the start of the ritual. Excitedly, he exclaimed that he'd always wanted to try this. Then, he swung the sword all around, shattering the illusory world around him. In the real world, Rollo was there comforting the boy's father. Bailey was really worried, admitting that it's tough for a dad to watch his son go down a path he couldn't take, but he emphasized that these moments prove one's determination. Suddenly, the oath stone began to crack as if there was no tomorrow, and Leo shouted, warning his grandfather that the stone was breaking. In a moment of total shock, the stone shattered completely. Karen appeared in a flash of light where the broken stone had been, holding her new sword with a big smile on her face. He looked around grinning and asked what had happened to the oath stone, noticing its shards everywhere. Bailey stormed in, kinda mad, demanding to know what the kid had done. Karen, all thrilled, raised the sword high, declaring it was the sword of execution, the guillotine of our ancestor Ray Liston. Karen's words left Hallow Liston and the elders totally frozen. They looked like they were hit by a shockwave. You see, that legendary blade, the famous guillotine, had practically been erased from the family history, with its ancient tales only shared by word of mouth, passed down to the patriarch and the big shots. Meanwhile, everyone was wondering why this sword was showing up now, and Hallow Liston, troubled, pondered if the moment of the pact was truly drawing near. That's when Hallow Liston turned to his grandson and asked if he was afraid of the sword. The kid with the biggest confidence in the world shot back a loud no after processing the whole mess. Hallow Liston started to speak slowly about the family's old stories. Back in the day, their ancestors made a pact with the blue dragons to get rid of the demons, and the proof of that promise was the famous oath stone, just waiting for a descendant to finally fulfill it. Hallow Liston looked firmly at Karen, seriously wondering if he was the lucky one who would honor this whole deal. Then, Arallo piped up and raised his hand, making the powerful declaration, Karen, son of Baal Listin, was officially the chosen one for execution. Guillotine, a legit member of Castle Xiangge, and a qualified heir to inherit all the initiation rights. Raphael freaked out at those words. The guy was all riled up, questioning how they could give privileges to some kid. Meanwhile, Bali was running to check on how his son was doing, but Karen quickly reassured him that he was fine. On the other hand, Telis, the oldest uncle, was completely lost in thought, admitting he had never heard of this sword, and that its aura was raising some red flags for him. In his mind, Chili addressed his brother Bali, saying he wouldn't let the succession get messed up by some new variable like his kid, even if the kid was now on a unique path. After that, Rollo called the opening eyes ceremony to a close, and told everyone to get back to their lives. As folks were leaving, Raphael confronted his older brother, all fired up, asking if he was just going to chill out. Telis, in a zen vibe, replied that soon they would sit down and talk, but the mess needed to sort itself out now. Raphael was like, dude! Even Gano, Telis's anxious sidekick, felt the pressure. Confused and pissed, Raphael couldn't stop questioning why Baal's kid was chosen among all these people. They offered a bit of wisdom, saying the most important thing now was to avoid fighting among themselves during the goodbye. Baal, all worried, asked his son if he'd be okay on his own. Ain, who was there, reassured Baal that the castle had a gay and was the safest place in the universe. Bali agreed that the castle was a fortress against threats, but he dropped that warning about the internal threats. He hinted that his brothers wouldn't have the guts to pull any stunts in front of their dad, Enrique. Continuing the chat, he mentioned that Lady Sabina would be overseeing Karen's initiation rites, and wouldn't you know it, both Karen and the dance crew were relieved about that. Halio's younger sister, was quite the celebrity for her skills, not falling short of her brother, known as the White Wolf. You know how it is. The tough guy gave his son a heads up to be respectful to the White Wolf, and the kid promised he'd keep it cool. Before they said goodbye, Henry delivered the final message from the bottom of the well, letting them know a permanent residence would be set up for the dance family in the castle, and they could swing by anytime. The dance crew, all sentimental, thanked Henry for having their backs, saying that now they could head out solo without a hitch, giving a wave to his son. He told him to take care and stay sharp, just in case he needed help. After the train left, Henry took Karen to the castle, saying that Lady Sabina was waiting for them. Before they got to the hall, Henry strategically pointed out that Sabina hated being called grandma, so it was best to avoid that. Karen appreciated the tip, but thought it was pretty weird. Finally, they arrived at the spiritual training hall in Cheyenne High Forest, a place only the direct lineage could set foot in. Henry mentioned that the White Wolf was inside and that Lord Leo was there too, as it was a special request from Raphael's dad. Karen was all excited about this and went in, while Heinrich figured the fun was about to start again. Even before opening the door, he already felt a massive mana vibe coming from the hall. When he finally opened the door, he made a smooth announcement, introducing himself to the White Wolf, and a voice from inside told him to come in without any nonsense. Can you believe the kid was surprised by Lady Sabina's youthful appearance? She greeted him and asked if he was shocked to see her not looking how he imagined. Sabina kept it real, saying time flew and the dance kid had grown up. Meanwhile, Karen, with her sharp radar, quickly realized that Sabina's eternal youth came from her ability to reconstruct her body with mana, a trick only for 8-star masters. She, Sabina, quickly had the kids sit cross-legged next to Leo. Obedient Karen whispered to her nervous cousin that they were going to see each other a lot from now on, and that he was super anxious. Sabina mentioned she had heard about her title, and then Karen explained what she had read about it in history books because she liked that sort of thing. Sabina smiled and said that, just like her brother Rollo said, he really was an interesting kid. When the boy asked what their grandfather had said, she shared the message. He's going to be a kid you'll love, and added that now she understood why, just by looking at him. Sabina remembered a conversation with Rollo, where he described Karen as a child who needed to navigate a vast sea and asked her to be his light, to guide him so he could rule that ocean. She saw massive potential in the kid, like an open, wild ocean, and even though he was still rough around the edges, one day he could dominate a generation. Sabina thought this little guy was interesting, a real fun ride. Sabina kicked off her lesson, telling everyone that sitting cross-legged was like the foundation of cultivating mana, and that once they passed this initial stage, they would be able to cultivate mana without having to stay in that position, just like she does, you know? Then, she released a wave of crystal clear mana straight from the sea that left the kids in awe. Sabina then revealed the method of the Sea Lord, which is based on the idea of creating an ocean of mana within the body, and, of course, controlling it all. She explained that an individual's power increases with the number of oceans they control. If you control 8 oceans, you're at 8-star level, my dude, and mastering those 8 oceans like they're one giant sea, well, that takes you into the realm of 9 stars. Sabina mentioned that only 3 people across the entire continent had reached that level, and only 1 within the empire. It clicked for Karen that this famous person was her grandfather, Rollo. Sabina said that the only 9-star expert on the continent was none other than her brother Ralph. This ignited a flame of determination in Karen, who made a vow he was going to reach his grandfather in this life, no matter the cost. Sabina instantly recognized that crazy ambition in the kid. He thought it was all pretty fun, believing he needed some hardcore training. So it was time to kick off the mana training, and Sabina had the guys pour mana into the channels that had been opened during the awakening ceremony, reminding them that the power of mana shouldn't be controlled but embraced, you know? Sabina watched the mana waves from the boys, and noticed that Karen's were still a bit rough around the edges, so she made it a point to guide Lou to work from the heart. First off, she was totally impressed by Karen's skill, thinking about how this kid was already showing off this power right after the awakening ceremony. She compared him to Leo, who was just starting to take his first steps towards reaching 2-star level, even though he had received the Lord of the Seas method 2 years ago. In contrast, Karen was sculpting his own paths of mana with an impressive naturalness without any instruction whatsoever, but out of nowhere, Karen started feeling a crazy amount of pressure, like her body was getting torn apart, and she stopped cultivating immediately. At first, Sabina thought the girl was just worn out, but then she realized Karen had adjusted her pace beautifully. In that moment, Leo collapsed from pushing his mana too hard, and Sabina rushed over to him in a panic, scolding him for going too far. Sabina, admitting to herself, realized she had really gotten distracted watching all of Karen's talent. She figured that the adult's job was to make sure the kids didn't hurt themselves due to recklessness. Karen looked at Leo with a disappointed expression, calling him pathetic. Sabina compared Leo to Karen, who had really evaluated her limits and stopped before breaking down. She was impressed with the kid's self-control, even with all that thirst for power, and began to wonder if he really needed a guide to help him. Sabina turned to Karen and promised to ensure his safety for the next 3 years, asking him to focus on honing his power during that time to protect himself. And of course, Karen agreed with tons of enthusiasm. Later, at the dual training grounds, Leo poked Karen, asking if she was really going to use the guillotine sword, even in practice. Karen shot back that she had no problem with that at all, explaining that his grandfather had given him a special sheath to keep the sword's aura in check. At that moment, a new instructor came in and introduced himself as the one who would be training the kids in fencing, the commander of the Sea Wolf Knights, Xeris. Xerus greeted them politely. Xerus informed the kids that he wouldn't be calling them young masters until they earned the recognition of the Sea Wolf Knights. Karen shot back that he could care less about that and thought it was whatever. But deep down, he knew that earning the respect of the Blue Wolves through skill was a family tradition. Xerus was taken aback by Karen's unusual reaction. Realizing that most nobles would have been offended, he thought to himself, could it be that a serious and steady heir finally showed up in the family after all this time? But in fact, Karen was thinking that in the end, everyone would end up bowing down to him. When Xerus sensed that aura, he changed his mind instantly, concluding that who had arrived was not a serious heir, but rather someone even worse than Leo, a true con artist. Meanwhile, Sabina was warning her brother Hallo Liestin, having a straight talk about the impact Karen could have on the succession drama and what that meant for his own son. He, feeling suspicious, asked if his sister was insinuating that his son could be threatened by his nephew. Sabina explained that if Karen's extraordinary talent started to become known throughout the empire, it would clearly affect who would succeed him and the entire wheel of fortune. She was expressing her concerns to her brother Hallo, fearing that the family could face ruin now that the Oath Stone had been destroyed, especially with the demons coming in droves from across the northern sea. Hallo thought all of this was nonsense and revealed a secret prophecy known only to the head of the family. Whoever breaks the stone will establish a new one, just like his ancestor did long ago. Sabina realized that this meant the time for the pact was drawing near. When she asked him when he was going to tell Karen, Hallo replied that it would happen when the time was right. In the winter, Bali was sitting there reading a letter from his son Karen. Karen sent a shout out to reassure his dad that he was doing just fine and shared his progress in training, saying he had mastered the 4th form of 2 different fencing styles. He also mentioned he was trying to get along with the family, just like his dad had asked, and that he was especially looking out for Leo. At the end of the letter, he jokingly asked for some cash because his allowance had run out, which made Bali laugh, filled with affection. During a chat with Heinrich, Bali reminisced about how nervous he was when he left Karen at the castle for the first time 3 years ago. Heinrich, much more laid back, told Bali to chill out, saying the kid had adjusted like a true chameleon, and that nowadays the castle wasn't even dead silent anymore because of him. Despite Bali's attempts to tell his son not to draw attention to himself, Heinrich, in his wise way, laid it out straight. A gem shines even when it's hidden, you know? But he also made it clear that the situation could change pretty quickly, as soon it would be impossible to keep a lid on the news about Karen. And like a true blue wolf, he'd have to face the responsibilities that came with it. What was really on Bali's mind was how his brothers would react to Karen's growing influence. Heinrich didn't miss the chance to give Bali another piece of advice, reminding him that Lady Sabrina was a fan of Karen. Bali even sighed in relief at that. He shared with Heinrich that the money he was sending was worth it, and Heinrich was happy to see the kid feeling lighter and less worried. But Bali had a nagging feeling that his aunt was going to bail from the castle soon. Heinrich, always the calm in the storm, reassured him again, saying Karen had already made a solid friendship with the Sea Wolf Knights, to the point where they even called Karen the little angry sea dog. In the training field, Karen showed up ready to roll, training like a machine and really going for it against the big knight Rans. In his unique style, he took Rans down, saying that the Sea Wolf's sword art was useless if you were a coward, and that you should fight with everything you've got even if your bones were broken. Rans had no choice but to concede, agreeing that the only thing he felt was the strength Karen had. He couldn't believe it when Karen called the others over. His muscles were like balloon muscles, and Hans, feeling totally defeated, admitted that without mana, he was nothing compared to her, thinking about how much that kid had evolved in a year. Then Hans quickly pointed out that being a zero meant deciding when that would happen, since Hallo Liestin was in the capital. With that know-it-all attitude, he speculated that he was going to be sent to the Celestial Summit region in the west of the duchy, where demon sightings were only going to increase. Meanwhile, nearby, Leo was anxious, wondering why he didn't want the same mission as Karam, but at the same time he wanted to make his parents proud. Back in the present, Bali told Heinrich that his call wasn't just about the letter. Bali handed over a small pouch and mentioned that the inspectors at his territory's gate had found 1 kilours in a merchant's cart coming from the barony of Belos. He confirmed it was something called cocaine and asked Heinrich to investigate what was going on in the barony of Belos, starting with the Blue Sea Castle. At the train station, someone showed up asking if this was the Blue Sea Castle. That night, Karen was acting like a thief, sneaking around the castle grounds after crashing a party and stealing a bottle of liquor from Xerus's collection. He muttered to himself that messing around in Xerus's collection was always a thrill. While enjoying his drink, he overheard someone outside asking the guard about Duke Liestin, who had something urgent to take care of. The guard confirmed that the Duke wasn't there, that he had gone to the capital, and that the commander of the Eris Knights was in charge. Karen seized the opportunity and jumped into the conversation. When the guard recognized Karen, the visitor introduced himself as the young Baron Rohan Belos, who already knew Karen's reputation from the grapevine. Although Rohan's assistant wanted him to speak to the Knight Commander, Karen, always feisty, insisted that only he would hear the story because it was a matter of courtesy to have a noble in front of him with an urgent matter. And of course, he told the guard to send a message to the heiress. The way Karen carried himself impressed Rohan, but he was a bit wary seeing a kid holding a bottle of liquor. He then invited Rohan to follow him into a private room. Karen summed up the drama that had Orhan all worked up. There was a gang of thugs in the eastern mountains of his barony. Orhan confirmed it and dropped the bombshell that these guys were dealing drugs and kidnapping people to traffic them. He said, looking a bit downcast, that his barony barony was poor and weak militarily, and that his dad's attempt to take on the thugs had been a total flop, leaving the old man bedridden. Carol, all fired up, slammed his liquor bottle on the table, shouting that taking these punks out wasn't punishment enough. But then he asked a question that could scramble anyone's thinking, wondering how a group of criminals could be strong enough to take on an army. He fired off that they suspected they were deserters from the Southern Kingdom's army, which was in a serious battle. Then Karen, in a philosophical mood, concluded that things had gotten this way because, after the evil emperor was gone, the Imperial Army focused on the war in the south, leaving the north wide open. Naturally, that meant the deserters turned into thugs. Rohan was on board with that logic. Karen, in a friendly gesture, offered Rohan a drink, mentioning that the Baronesa de Belos was close to his dad's fief and wanted to help too. Orhan felt grateful, but couldn't help but wonder if it was right to accept a drink from a kid. Karen bluntly said the drink was from the Cerzeris collection and asked him to keep it a secret. Rohan, shocked, could hardly believe he was talking about the famous commander of the Knights. Just as things started to heat up, Xeris walked into the room and snapped at Karen that he couldn't touch the liquor. Rohan, all nervous, knocked over the drink, but Xeris calmed things down. Xeris looked at Rohan and confirmed he'd heard about the issues with the thugs, and Rohan admitted that was why he came looking for help. But before Xeris could come up with any reply, Carol jumped in and interrupted him. Xeris turned to him, a bit pissed, saying that a kid like him shouldn't be drinking at that age. He snatched the drink back like, "Knock it off, kid." After that, Xeris apologized to the young baron for the scene, but quickly reassured him, explaining that the castle by the sea, Azul wasn't gonna sit back while his old partner was suffering. He also mentioned that they were planning to organize and send troops soon. So Karen, on a whim, offered to go on that mission, but Xeris shut her down right away, arguing that their team was a bunch of trained ninjas, and there might be skilled fighters hiding around too. Rohan was like, whoa, surprised by how serious Xeris was about wanting to help. Xeris insisted, knowing that the real conflict was way different from what they were training for. Karen fired back, saying being overprotected wasn't cool, but she stood her ground, wanting him to face a clear danger to the west. She had to keep the dark stuff with a cheeky smile. Karen asked what would happen if he made her an offer she couldn't refuse. Cut to the train station, where Lou was in shock at being dragged into the mission. All excited, he threw his arm around Xeris, celebrating because it was their first mission together. Xeris, off to the side, realized he'd been played and that the guy used Lou's connection to Sabina as a secret weapon in this plan. But thinking it over, Xeris figured it might actually be a good thing since a reliable guardian would be with them. Xeris also got that his deal with Lord Leo was a sign he was pleased with how training had gone. Baron Rohan also dropped by to say goodbye, super worried about the security of the Duke's grandkids, because if anything happened, the blame would fall squarely on the family. Xeris tried to calm him down, assuring him he didn't need to freak out, because with Sabina involved, nothing bad would happen to the kids. But then Sabina cut Xeris off with a bombshell announcement, saying she wouldn't intervene unless the kids were in a life or death situation. That left Rohan and Leo in complete panic. Xeris was all about Sabina's audacity, and she hinted she had her reasons for not wanting to go to the front lines, something Xeris seemed to grasp. At the station, Sabina noticed Leo was trembling and told him she knew he was scared, but she wanted him to see this mission as a chance to show everything he had learned so far and earn respect as a member of the Blue Wolves. Karen, always with the sarcasm, asked if Leo needed a hug, always someone to give you a little nudge, Leo biting his lip in frustration. But deep down, Karen's words sparked something in him, making him realize it was time to prove himself. The magic train finally left the Blue Sea Castle, heading towards the barony of Belos. As the train pulled away, Karen thought, wow, I didn't expect this moment to come so quickly. On the train, Sabina tried to explain to Baron Rohan why she couldn't go to the battlefield. She revealed that her presence at the Blue Sea Castle was a secret, and that if she got caught, the villains would disappear without a trace. But Rohan was still worried about sending just 2 kids on this mission, noting that while the expensive one seemed fine, Leo was just a ball of anxiety. Meanwhile, Leo was lost in thought, remembering the scolding he got from his mom. She had asked how he could get close to Karen after the humiliation he suffered 3 years ago that tarnished their family name. She assured him that Karen was a rival, not a friend, but when Leo stayed silent, she called him a weakling. Finally, Leo spoke up and explained to his mom that, in reality, Karen wasn't his rival. He nailed it when he said the talent gap between them was ridiculous, considering Karen shone with 4 stars at 13, while he only managed 3 at 15. Leo concluded that Karen wasn't a rival, but the motivation that kept him fighting. His mom wrapped it up with a reality check, saying he only saw the trees but not the forest. Back on the train, Sabina chatted with Leo, who admitted he was nervous. After all, it was his first mission. Sabina got straight to the point and asked if he thought he could kill a man. Leo hesitated, but Sabina was firm, telling him not to doubt himself because she knew how hard he had trained. She even reminded him that she was the one who trained him. Feeling a chill, Leo called her Master. The train announced they'd arrive in 20 minutes, so Sabina decided that during the EIA mission, they would call each other Master and Student. She announced that she was going to jump off the train to scout the situation unnoticed. Rohan was in shock, objecting to the danger of such craziness, but Sabina simply reassured him, saying it wouldn't be his fault because her nephews would be watching from a distance. Karen even commented on her audacity. Admiring the courage of the figure, Sabina jumped off the train, leaving Roran and Leo in shock, pondering the eccentricities of the Lestrange family. When they finally arrived at the barony of Belos, they came face to face face with Harry's dad, Baron Bellos, who was there looking all beat up and apologized for greeting them while seated due to his health. Karen, super polite, told him not to worry and asked about his injuries. The Baron, already bedridden, thanked the boys for their concern, mentioning that he had met Karen and his dad 10 years ago. He remarked on how wonderfully the boy had grown and how proud that must make his father. Not really into the formality anymore, Karen asked the Baron to just call him Young Master Karen, and the Baron agreed on the spot. It dawned on Caron that our boy Caron had been chosen for his first mission, and it seemed had hit level 4 stars in martial arts at a young age, a real prodigy. He even expressed confidence in the main house's assessment of the kids, but he felt a bit nervous about sending such promising little fish on a mission with so much trouble. But then Caron, with his chill demeanor, assured the Baron that he understood the pressure, but for them, failing a mission would be a huge disappointment that would tarnish the honor of the Blue Wolves. The protagonist turned to Leo, seeking that moral support, and despite being a bit reluctant, Leo confirmed that yes, they were going to be absolute branches of success. The Baron, kind of chuckling, thanked them for their confidence, easing everyone's minds. Young Caron sensed that the Baron needed some rest and decided it was time to leave. In that spirit, the Baron passed the responsibility to them and said he had a guide ready to show them the way, and so the boys set off, following the guide, crossing the snow-covered mountains. Caron teased Leo, asking if he was already tired, but Leo, unfazed, was more suspicious of the guide. He pointed out that he wasn't sure if the guy wasn't in cahoots with the bad guys. Caron, with his typical sarcasm, congratulated Leo for finally thinking ahead and quickly confirmed that, in fact, his suspicions were right. The guide could very well be yet another one of the bad guys. Leo was shocked and wanted to know how he knew that. So, Caron explained that he had overheard Baron Rohan's conversation at the station. In the flashback, Rohan's assistant was asking how they were going to find the criminal's hideout, and Rohan, being clever, suggested that they needed to use a traitor from within the area. When Leo questioned why he hadn't been told sooner, Rohan replied that things were really tense that day. He assessed the situation and demonstrated that Rohan was quite shrewd for using a traitor against them, explaining to Leo that their plan was basically to be the bait, since kidnapping the young nobles would rake in a lot of cash. The fact that they still hadn't caught the traitor was a sign that things had escalated to a level that there was no turning back. Guide Sven took the two into an ambush set by the bandit leader, who had paid him extra just because they were young nobles. One of the bandits noticed that the two didn't exactly look obedient. In that atmosphere, Karen was ready to fight, declaring that he wouldn't forgive those bastards for spreading drugs in his father's land. Meanwhile, at the Baron's house, Rohan asked his father if he was doing okay, and the father calmly replied that he was fine. Rohan offered a glass of water, and with concern, asked if the two young men were all right. The Baron responded that the Blue Sea Castle sending the boys without any information was proof enough of their confidence in their abilities. Then the Baron's dad commented that Karen reminded him of Duke Ralph's youth, not just in appearance, but in his attitude and confidence. The Baron, handsome as well, decided to give his son some encouragement, saying it was right to have faith in the boys. Meanwhile, in the mountains, Karan was in the middle of an insane battle, tearing apart the bandits as if it were a video game. Leo stood there, like a shocked spectator, thinking that Karan had turned into a real monster. The bandit leader was left speechless, and told his men that they weren't just any random guys and that they needed to retreat to call for backup, which infuriated the leader. He wasn't going to let himself be beaten by a kid and charged at Charon, enveloped in a red energy. And of course, he was immediately met by Charon, who criticized him, saying his war cry was annoying, and then sliced the guy in half with a single blow. Leo was left speechless as Charon casually commented that, by accident, he had used a powerful technique and still had the audacity to complain that the leader stained his clothes. One of the surviving thugs, Aura, was shocked by Charon's power and the aura of his sword, which almost knocked him over. He decided to surrender right then and there, grinning wickedly. Charon asked Aura if he had some rope and told him to fetch it. To Leo's surprise, Charon had Aura tie him and Leo up, and even handed swords to both of them. Leo was left wondering what was going on, and Charon explained that to be an effective bait and uncover the bandits' hideout, their capture needed to look convincing, since it wouldn't make sense for two nobles to be taken down by a single unarmed guy. On the way, Charon started questioning their captive, Aura. Terrified, Aura confessed that they were part of the Chios Kingdom section, caught in a war down south. Then Charon asked how many of them were at the fortress. Aura said there were 130 in total, including 2 mages and the guard knights. At that moment, Charon realized he had made a huge mistake. He understood that the guys he captured weren't just any nobles, but the heirs of a powerful family. He found Aura's story about the leader promising easy money completely suspect. He was wondering why elite mages would team up with a mere infantry captain, and why they would pick the poor Baronesa de Belos to pull off a heist. So Charon concluded that the story didn't hold up, and decided it was time to see the truth staring him in the face. When they arrived at the bandits' hideout, they were greeted with looks of shock from the other guards, who couldn't understand why Orhan brought in hostages. At the entrance, the guards questioned Aura about why he returned alone and armed. Casual as can be, he claimed he took the young master's weapons and that the others had gone out to deal with the rogues. The guards started making fun of him, but still ended up opening the gate. Upon entering, Karen wondered why those deserters seemed totally at ease, but something sinister weighed down on his heart. Something strange. His sword, the guillotine, began to get restless too. Soon, he realized that the source of his discomfort was nothing less than some bird carcasses hanging like trophies. And there's this black magic circle on the ground, all creepy and eerie. He lost track of time and told Aura to untie him and hand over the sword like it was no big deal. Then he turned to Leo, who looked more lost than a blind guy in a shooting range, and asked him to draw the silver sword, warning that he'd need it soon. But right then, the magic circle activated, and armed skeletons started rising from the ground, sending Aura into a panic. Suddenly, the leader of the bandits showed up, all smug, and cracked a joke as he received the hostages in his mountain hideout. Karen looked around for the black mage, but couldn't find a trace of him, figuring he must be hiding somewhere nearby. So, in a quick move, he grabbed Aura as a hostage, putting the sword to his neck and threatening to slice if the bandits tried to attack. Leo was stunned, thinking this was a real slap in the face to noble honor. The bandit leader laughed at the situation and asked if nobles didn't value honor above all else. Karen shot back with a "so what" right in the bandit's face, questioning why he couldn't do that. The leader, finding Karen amusing, replied that the hostage was useless and that Aura could be discarded, giving him the green light to do whatever he wanted. With a smug grin, the leader shoved Aura toward Karen. Noticing the situation was getting dicey, Leo asked Karen what the plan was. Karen, all full of confidence, said the plan was simple. They just needed to take out that arrogant leader. But the leader picked up on Karen's blue mana aura and got suspicious. At that moment, Karen told Leo he'd handle the leader and that poor Leo would have to deal with the skeletons. Before Leo could wrap his head around what was happening, Karen had already stepped forward, focused on the leader, leaving Leo literally face to face with an army of skeletons that were ready to pounce. Leo was in shock, surrounded by skeletal soldiers, wondering how he was going to handle all this just as the skeletons charged at him. Karen had reached the leader and delivered a brutal blow, shouting, "Third form of the sea wolf sword." The energy from Karen's sword shot toward the leader, who was like, "Oh my god!" As soon as the strike hit the leader, it sliced through his hand. The guy fell to the ground screaming that Karen was a damn brat. Karen just laughed it off, saying if the guy was gonna attack, he should have done it earlier. So, the leader was questioning why the Blue Sea Castle was sticking its nose in his business, and Karen explained that this barony was right next to his dad's lands. Then he mentioned he didn't intend to kill him, but he was taking him to the castle. Meanwhile, Leo was holding his own against the skeletons from a distance. Karen was watching him and cheering the kid on, just like the sea wolf sword art teaches them. Karen then turned to the wounded leader, whose name was Michael Knox, and asked for his name again to be sure. After the guy confirmed it, Karen jabbed his leg hard, forcing him to surrender. With a cold smile, he told the leader to command his men to drop their weapons, and the guy did so in agony. Michael, defeated, lamented his downfall to two brats, but threw out a warning. When they showed up, not even anyone from his family would be able to handle the situation. Karen quickly guessed that the leader was relying on the dark wizards in the same way. So, Karen made fun of the leader, asking if he really thought his family would send just 2 kids for this. He also pointed out that the magic circle had disappeared, and that it was normal for them to have a guardian. And right at that moment, a loud explosion echoed in the distance. After that, Karen remarked how they wasted time with the leader, and ended up letting the dark wizard escape, creating a tense atmosphere. Suddenly, Sabina showed up holding the decapitated head of the dark wizard, and Leo was like, "Whoa, gross." Meanwhile, Sabina was declaring the mission a total failure because they let the most important lead slip away, the wizard, who was still alive. Karen, feeling a bit cheeky, asked his aunt if she was at least impressed with his methods. Sabina, filled with rage, started pounding the fallen leader until he passed out. Then she scolded Karen for rushing in without thinking. She even compared him to his older brother Rollo, but she also gave him some credit for being bold. But of course, she'd take points off for using hostages. When she asked why, Karen explained that he wanted to exploit their weakness, since they would never imagine a noble would do something like that. "Would you pull a stunt like that?" Sabina thought it was hilarious and laughed, calling him a crazy kid like she'd never seen before. Meanwhile, the captured leader was thinking to himself, what a bunch of crazy bastards. Then Sabina dropped a bombshell. They were on their way back to Baron Belos's castle because guess what? There was still a lot to clear up. As they were getting out of that battle mess, the families of the villagers who had been captured were freed from their cages, and it was an emotional scene, with reunions and tears all around. Soon, our boy, Karen, with his sharp eye, spotted the thug just standing there, looking guilty as hell. He couldn't help but sarcastically say that he seemed to be feeling a weight on his conscience. Then Carol got real with him. It was way too early to feel that way because, at the rate things were going, he could end up locked in the Baron's dungeon just like the rest of the crew. Aura, the thug, justified himself by saying he was going to be taken to the Blue Sea Castle with his captain, instead of keeping the guys in the cell company. Leo, always a bit skeptical, asked if it was really safe to leave Aura loose around there. Carol explained that they needed him to help carry the injured captain, but didn't forget to warn Leo, "Stay sharp, man." Just then, one of the rescued villagers approached and jumped in to save Aura's skin, asking if he was going to get punished too. Dayon started praising his honor, mentioning that he had helped the prisoners by bringing medicine to the sick and even giving food to the hungry, asking them to show a bit of mercy. Bina turned to Karen to hear what he thought about all this, looking at Aura, who looked more shocked than than someone who just got unexpectedly slapped. Karen decided they should consider giving him a second chance, since after all, he was the one who led them to the hideout. Aura was filled with gratitude and pledged loyalty to Karen till death, but then Leo jumped in, catching Karen's attention about something he thought was important. Leo led Karen to a strange barrel that, believe it or not, had a glowing magic stone inside that was just breathtaking. Meanwhile, the villagers were in the mood to celebrate, poking fun at the captured thugs. While Leo thought the young master would throw a big party when they got back, Karen was lost in his own thoughts. He finally figured out the reason for that huge gang of bandits in this remote area, and get this, there was a hidden magical stone mine right there that even the Baron's own family hadn't a clue about. Noticing the evil glint in Karen's eyes, Leo asked what the guy's plan was now. Moments later, Baron Rohan and his father showed up all triumphant to greet the heroes. Rohan ordered the prisoners to be thrown into the dungeon and asked Sabina to bring the bandit leader. And with everything going on, Sabina, striking a guardian pose, pointed at Karen and Leo, as if to say they were the ones who really knew what was up. Or maybe she was just inviting everyone to a modest banquet, but the kid Karen, being real, shot back a solid no. He said he had to bounce to the Blue Castle right away, no time to waste. Then Rohan hit him with that line about the barony not having the cash to pay for the mission, and asked to delay the payment. That's when our hero's expression changed, and he started trash-talking the barony, telling them to shove off to some forsaken place, which left Rohan fuming. Rohan then dropped the bomb that the bandits were after something more, and that's how Karen made the big reveal about the magical stone, leaving Rohan completely stunned. He didn't even know a mine like that existed on his land. With everything on the table, Karen decided he had a proposal. He suggested that the Blue Castle and the Balos barony could work together to develop the mine, as long as the castle put up the initial funds and handled security. Rohan was internally shocked, wondering if this kid really knew what he was talking about, but he quickly realized that having a powerful family like the Listens involved in the barony's mine would be a huge win. Rohan figured Karen had this all well thought out, and was even impressed by the kid's audacity in tackling such serious negotiations. To top it off, he said this deal could also bring a garrison of Listen Knights into the barony, solving defense issues and boosting the economy. When Rohan asked how much of a cut Karen wanted, the kid, with a masterstroke, just dodged the question. Talking about how it was way too early for a kid to be discussing these details, and that it was a conversation for Rohan to have with his dad, Rohan agreed to meet with his father, and would get back to them later. Our boy Karen questioned Sabina about why she thought things would get complicated in the bandits' hideout. Sabina explained that the issue was the Black Mage, and not just any mage, but the infamous Tade de Lada, a wanted criminal, and a respected 6th Circle mage. She scolded the boys, telling them they were worried about those mediocre bandits and forgetting about the real target, which was the mage. And so she declared the mission a failure, a judgment that Karen took with respect. Sabina then turned to Leo, who seemed to be left out, and suddenly decided to praise him, saying he had done better than she expected, especially since it was his first time facing the undead. She encouraged him to have more confidence. Back at the Castle of the Blue Sea, Hallow Listine was back from the capital. His entourage welcomed him and informed him that the Knights of the West had also returned, and that Carol, Leo, and Sabina were coming back from their mission. But suddenly, a messenger arrived with an urgent message from the Imperial Palace. Get ready, because the trouble is just beginning, man. Our hero Hallow opened the letter and was in shock. His brain literally froze for a second. The thing is, the Emperor hadn't mentioned anything like this before he left the capital. What a mess. And to top it off, the king directly summoned his grandson, Karen, for a trip to the capital. Cut to a scene on the train, where Aura was hauling his captive, Captain Michael, around like a delivery package. Michael, in his boldness, tried to convince Aura to break free with him, saying that the security there was a joke, but Aura, really pissed off, punched him and told him he was nothing but a useless troublemaker. Soon after, they arrived back at the Castle of the Blue Sea and were greeted by the whole family. Bali didn't miss the chance to throw a jab. He said that the chaos surrounding Karen was still the same, and Karen got mad, threatening his brother. Bali gave his son a warm hug while Sabina, who was nearby, he mentioned that Rollo should have called Karen because of the trouble he stirred up in the barony of Balos. Meanwhile, Bala was all proud of Leo, congratulating him on his achievement and showering him with compliments, saying the news had already reached him before it arrived. But then, a tired guy in the crew warned that he was going to step out for a bit. The vibe shifted when Sabina, seriously, asked Bailey if he knew anything weird happening in the Empire's politics. So, Bailey explained that the other powers, aside from their family, were quickly rallying around the Salmon Duchy and the Dias Marquisate. Sabina mentioned that her dad, Hallow Listane, was supposed to meet with various families in the capital, but canceled everything, completely, because the talks with the Emperor went nowhere. Bailey commented that those two families were the ones that helped take down the previous Emperor, and now they're calling the shots like they own the place. Sabina expressed her regret over her brother Hallow Listine deciding to step away from power for the Empire's future, and now he's paying the price for it. They both realized the era of peace is coming to an end, and it's time for the family to take action. Sabina saw a silver lining in the mess, saying what Karen did might be the move they needed to justify expanding their influence, sending the tide elsewhere. She said Karen is an interesting kid because he did something that helps the family at the right time. Bailey said she was laying it on a little thick with the praise, but she replied it wasn't exactly a compliment. Then, Sir Xeris showed up and congratulated them for driving off the runaway thugs. He announced he was going to start interrogating the leader of the bandit bandits war brought in, promising to get the information out of him one way or another. When he asked who Hora was, Charon explained that for now, he was also considered a bandit, but since he was an informant, Xerxes decided to treat him nicer and even thought about letting him go, wanting to make him his personal servant. And Xerxes agreed with that idea. When the guys tried to take a break, Xerxes held them back, reminding them the mission wasn't over yet. Then Charon asked how many Xerxes had arrived, and he answered it was just recently, and he still had to write a report. Of course, when Charon asked if they had to do reports, separated, Xerxes let them write together, all in good spirits. Then Charon, being a bit cheeky, immediately tried to shift the responsibility to Leo, claiming he had done all the heavy lifting. He went on the charm offensive, saying Uncle Tiles would evaluate the report and that this was Leo's chance to shine, focusing on his achievements. After that, Xerxes sent the prisoners to the dungeon, while Sabina tossed him the head of the most wanted criminal, insisting that the boys' reports were more than enough. Meanwhile, Charon wished Leo good luck with writing up the report, but mentioned he was heading to the Mana training room to work on the 4th form he had unlocked. This left Xerxes shocked, not understanding how the guy had so much dedication. In the meantime, Rollo called for an emergency family meeting. He explained that the reason was something that went down during the containment of demons appearing around the castle area. He asked Rainer to call the commander of the knights, and Xerxes went and brought back a piece of demon skin. Hallo Listein explained that this skin was collected from the Celestial Dome region over by the west side. He noted that the dark mana from that skin was off the charts. He realized with a jolt of shock that it belonged to the fallen emperor. Rollo suggested 2 options. Either it was just the will of the emperor still lingering here, or the bastard was still alive. He deduced that all this was connected to the mess going on in the Empire, and dropped another bombshell. The emperor had found out about the trouble in the barony of Belos. Guess what? He sent a personal invitation for Charon to come to the capital. Rollo announced he wanted to send Leo and the Seawolf Knights to accompany Charon, but made sure to say he would ask the kid if he wanted to go first. More importantly, Rollo wanted to mess with what was on Charon's mind when he made that deal with Baron Belos, so he sent Xerxes to get the kid. Xerxes found Charon, meditating in the training room. Everyone was there. Charon asked Xerxes when he had arrived, and Xerxes replied it hadn't been long. Then Charon commented that aside from their usual family, Sir Xerxes was the only one allowed in, so it must be something serious. Our hero Xerxes came in with the news that he had been summoned to a family council meeting where they would discuss things. With the preparations for a trip to the capital in full swing, things were getting serious. He explained that the head of the family had called Lord Charon to go over the details directly, so the drama was about to unfold. When they arrived at the council, Hallo Liston wasted no time and quickly mentioned that he'd heard Charon's first mission was a success. The kid confirmed it, really pleased, but then the mood shifted when Hallo Liston started probing Charon about why he decided to act independently and went against orders. Rollo was clearly uncomfortable with the kid's attitude and asked if he realized that could be a serious insult to House Belos. Charon didn't catch on that this was more of an interrogation than anything else, but he denied doing anything wrong. He argued that he had just made a proposal to Baron Belos, and the guy agreed of his own free will, no pressure involved. In the middle of their discussion, our protagonist raised his voice and began explaining his actions to his grandfather, stating that he had certain priorities that were more important than following all the noble etiquette rules. When Hallo Listein, curious, asked what could be more crucial than, let's say, courtesy, Charon confidently answered that it was the family's honor. That response caught Rollo off guard because he thought Charon might be bragging about the deal, but instead, the kid chose to prioritize the family. The grandfather saw that as a respectable stance. In light of this, Hallo made a decision. He announced that the deal Charon brought would be a huge advantage for the family, and he tasked his son Baal with handling the formal negotiations. Baal, all excited, agreed to head to the barony of Belos first thing in the morning. Rollo then remarked that a father getting glory from his son's achievements wasn't such a bad thing after all. Look at that, in a way they were doing well. But Rollo quickly changed the subject. Now it was time to talk about the Emperor's letter. He informed Charon that His Majesty had summoned him because he'd heard news about him in the capital. Charon realized that just as Mysarius had said, the Emperor's letter was already on its way. Before Rollo returned to the Blue Sea Castle, he wondered if the Emperor's spy network, it really was that efficient. Then he started to think that the nobles pulling the strings of the puppet emperor were behind this quick invitation, not Emperor Hallo himself. Realizing he was being watched, he offered Charon the option not to go. He figured Charon was already onto what follow meant, heading to the capital. In that moment of all this drama, Hallo Liston was reflecting on what would be more strategic, to accept or refuse the summons. It's worth noting that deep down, he knew. He shouldn't have given Charon this choice, but the kid wasn't going to let it slide. He stood up and declared that the Emperor had called him, and it was his duty to go, end of story. He even mentioned it was a chance to see his maternal grandfather again. Charon asked if he would be going alone, and Rollo confirmed that Leo would be his partner on this mission, along with Rance's squad as bodyguards. Charon pointed out the need to stand out with his grandfather there, and Rollo joked that the guards were there not to protect him, but to handle any trouble he might cause. That was a good one. Then Rollo announced that they would be leaving in 3 days. Get ready for this. A little while later, Bali was wrapping up his negotiations with Baron Rohan. They agreed to split the mines, 80% for the Listanes and 20% for the Belos. But this guy Baal got hung up on an extra clause that seemed weird, stating that 5% of the Belos' share, a quarter of the total, would go directly to Charon and Leo. To Baal, that felt excessive for a simple mission. He questioned Rohan, who fancied himself himself a genius from the Imperial Academy about what motivated this decision. Rohan nonchalantly replied that this condition was an investment to win over the two young wolves who would one day run the Blue Castle. He saw Rohan as arrogant for thinking he had grasped the talent of those kids and found it extremely disrespectful. The two exchanged barbs, with Bali praising the guy's audacity. In the end, the young men were called and gratefully accepted the offer. Pai Rohan even said he was honored by the partnership. As they were leaving, Leo had a question for Karen. After finalizing the deal with the Baroness of Belos, he wanted to know how the 5% would be divided, and Karen, cold as ice, simply stated that of course he'd keep 9/10 while Leo would settle for 1/10. Leo was stunned by this proposal, but Karen threw out a threat that made Leo back down on the spot. Ale and his assistant were all ears during this scene, and the assistant remarked that the two of them, once the kings of childhood fights, had become best friends when they reached the capital. Leo was all hyped up and tense since he had only heard stories about the city and had no clue how to act. Karen gave him a pep talk, but Leo protested that he was about to meet the emperor, making his excitement more than justified. He was already imagining social parties and the beauties of the capital of Aide, dreaming about how he was going to charm everyone. Sabina, who had overheard the conversation, joined the duo and mentioned that Aide was packed with strong fighters, and it would be an epic experience for them. She promptly ordered wine glasses to celebrate their mission, and Karen, with his sarcasm, pointed out it was a bit odd for a 13-year-old to have wine glasses. So she ended up serving the wine in water cups. Man. Sabina wasted no time and asked Leo if he had ever tried wine before. He admitted that Karen had given him a sip or two. Then Sabina, all chill, offered him a cup, and Leo didn't think twice before accepting. In a light moment, Sabina raised her cup and tossed a compliment to the group, talking about how awesome their growth had been. Clever Karen took the chance to thank her, recognizing Sabina as a real teacher, but then she hit them with something heavy, saying that her promise to protect them for 3 years was up. She was sad that she wouldn't get to see the chaos they'd cause in the capital. Leo, feeling down at the news that Sabina was heading back to the North Sea, chimed in, "Does that mean we're not going to see you anymore?" Sabina wouldn't let it slide and teased him, telling him not to get so sentimental and that he should probably steer clear of parties with Carol. She explained that because of Carol's beauty, talent, and soft-spoken ways, everyone would be mesmerized. Leo panicked and pleaded with Carol not to ruin his chances of finding someone. Believing that the neighbor could capture all the attention, Karen inevitably called him an idiot because, you know, that's just the way it goes. Now, Karen had already asserted herself, telling Leo to stop stalling and keep drinking. Then, cut to the scene in the Blue Sea Castle, where Bali showed up to Rollo and shared the good news that the negotiations with Belos had been a success. Rollo was shocked because they struck a deal where they were going to give a cut to Karen and Leo, which was pretty out of the ordinary. Bali explained that the kid who was a baron had a big hand in this because he said the deal was an investment in the future. Hello, in a laid-back manner, praised the young baron's cleverness and thought that they had gained a solid ally. So, Hello trusted Bali with all the schemes related to the barony of Belos, but there was a weird vibe about the summons, like realizing that Rollo wasn't the type to dish out compliments too often. And then, Rollo dropped a bomb. The Emperor's call for Karen was super rare, since he hardly ever called any other family member besides himself. He went on to say that in the chat with the Emperor, he sensed a look of fear that still lingered in his eyes. Hallo Liston explained that this fear from the Emperor made him think there was some outside influence behind Karen's invitation. Bali agreed, finding everything very political, and began to wonder why Hallo Liston didn't deny the Emperor's request. He replied that he didn't deny it because he was curious to see how far Karen's potential would go. He mentioned that the kid was chosen by the ancestral sword Aguilhotina, and that meant he had a crucial role in the family and was about to face a lot of challenges. He saw this invitation as a test. If Karen was really going to carry the family's future, he needed to know how to handle these difficulties. Then, Rollo looked at Bale with concern and asked if he had any fears. Bale, feeling sentimental, got touched but composed himself and said he believed in his son wholeheartedly. Rollo, surprised by the heartfelt answer, couldn't help but smile and thought it was wonderful. The next day, Sabina was all dressed up to head back to the North Sea. Zeras, caught up in a flurry of questions, asked if she was going to say goodbye to the boys, but she was already on her way. Saying it wasn't necessary because he had enjoyed the night before, they said their goodbyes with a good vibe, and Zeras promised that there would be more wine on the next visit. Before leaving, Sabina exchanged a meaningful glance with Karen, who was just watching from the window. Then, as if it were nothing, Sabina slipped away, leaving behind the promise that they would meet again. Karen thought the North Sea was like a home to her, while all she cared about was finding food and wine while she waited. He didn't expect Sabina to leave so quickly. As soon as she was gone, Karen figured it was time for the uncles to make their move. It seemed like fate was listening, because, well, his uncles appeared out of nowhere, surprising the kid at the train station. The servant crew was there, hauling the kid's luggage. Leo was freaking out, trying to wrap his head around what was going on, and Heinrich came over to explain that the whole fuss was because they were meeting the Emperor as family representatives. He started grumbling about how Hans's crew was with them, and Zeres had already mentioned that their goal was to protect them, but that was to be expected, except Hans, being totally disrespectful, said the real reason was to make sure they wouldn't cause any trouble before hitting the road. Tillis decided to swing by the room. As soon as they greeted each other, Charles confirmed he had heard about the trip to the capital and came with a request. He asked them not to act in the capital like they did in the Blue Sea Castle. Carol gave a nod at the end, but she quickly realized that Uncle was always keeping an eye on her, making it clear that the capital was full of guys looking to take down the family, and that if there was any chance, he'd personally straighten her out. As soon as Tyler left, Karen's expression changed because he realized there was a big mess coming his way. Our hero couldn't care less about his uncle's threat, firing back when all he wanted was to pressure him for being the firstborn, you know? And like, he swore he was going to get back at that arrogant uncle. Fast forward to the train station, where preparations for the adventure were in full swing. Meanwhile, Karen and Hans were in a heated argument when Aura, that former thug, approached them. Grateful for the second chance he got, Caron, as cold as ever, replied sharply, and even cracked a cruel joke about taking Aura to the capital just to throw him in jail. Then he dropped a warning: don't relax. Aura went into a panic, begging Caron not to ditch him, and Caron just said he'd see how he behaved. Xeris, the group's mentor, whispered one last piece of advice, telling him not to get into trouble and to come back safe and sound. Just when the train was about to leave, Bali, our little hero's dad, made a dash to the platform to say goodbye to his son. He explained that he showed up because he wanted to take one last look at his kid before the trip, and added that his maternal grandpa was also eager for his arrival. Bali gave him a fatherly hug, asked him to come back safely and not get into too much trouble, and Caron just laughed at the situation. As soon as the train left, the scene cuts to Tiles, who was at the office. He received explosive news that the wife of his second son Raphael was plotting something in the capital, but for now he decided to hold off on taking any action. On the train, Caron asked Hans how long the trip would take, and he confidently replied it was about 6 hours crossing the autonomous territory of Teba. The two of them started chatting about Teba, which is quite a crazy place where the common folks elect the mayor and where cash is worth more than any plant you can think of. Hans went on to say that his influence within the empire came from his money, but it was pure survival since they were always being monitored by other provincial lords. He was sharp enough to realize that some citizens of the province often fled the tyranny of corrupt lords in search of refuges in the autonomous regions. Rands also added that that area was super friendly with the Blue Castle and always sent its knights on important missions. While the guys were talking about secretly visiting Teba later, all of a sudden, Caron felt a chill run down his spine as his sword started to vibrate with some weird presence. It was like, what the hell is this? And he realized the sword was picking up some danger in the air. The protagonist began to wonder if any of his uncles, Telis or Raphael, had infiltrated. Someone in the security detail thought about causing a ruckus, but quickly dismissed that idea because they knew they weren't that stupid. Meanwhile, someone who was just chilling noticed that Karen was acting strange and called him over. Karen, however, figured out that the real threat was coming from outside the caravan. Without wasting time, he told Hans to connect with the autonomous territory of Teba. Hans responded quickly like, what's up with this change of plans? But Carol blew up, saying there was no time to explain, and ordered him to warn everyone to get ready for an attack. Surprised, Hans followed orders without a second thought and started passing the message to the guards who were already gearing up for a fight. Meanwhile, Carol wondered how anyone would have the guts to attack a moving train. Just nearby, a group of masked attackers was about to put their evil plan into action. Their leader said that the time had come. The team started to move like it was the final countdown. As the train approached, those crazy guys ran to place explosive barrels tied with fuses on the track. As they finished, one of them lit the fuse while the leader warned everyone to get ready for the explosion. Well, the train hit the barrels and exploded in a way that was straight out of a movie, derailing and blowing everything up. Cut to Teba, where the mayor was getting slammed with criticism in a noisy meeting. The participants were loudly hurling insults at each other, some accusing one another of money laundering, while others tried to defend themselves. The discussion heated up, and someone shouted for the mayor to take action against the criminals in the room. The mayor started to question why he was still there, thinking he should have retired right after being the finance minister, lamenting that the city had turned, into a complete chaos, just fights between noble and common guilds. A helper interrupted the chaos of the meeting with an urgent message for the mayor. He brushed aside the fighting and walked over to the helper. One of the last participants asked if the message was about the tax investigation, and the mayor, keeping calm, lit a cigarette and replied that the investigation was the last thing he cared about right now. When asked if the investigation had been canceled, he simply said no, and then told them the investigation could go to hell. And it dropped the bomb 5 minutes ago. The train headed to the capital of the Listern family territory had exploded, and the two grandsons of the Grand Duke were on board. The guy was totally in shock. The mayor, keeping his cool like someone who knows chaos is about to unfold, explained what that really meant, that pretty much everyone was dead. Back at the explosion site, Karen managed to pull herself up from the rubble. Hans, all worried, asked if she was hurt, and Karen just said they were just a few scratches. Hans immediately requested a situation report, and the answer was that among the 11 people involved, there was one critically injured named Dell and 2 with minor injuries. Then, out of nowhere, another report came in from the OHRA squad, and guess what? 2 fatalities. Things were looking grim, man. Karen, realizing how serious it was, noticed that for a low-ranking member like Aurea, reporting in was pretty ballsy. This was serious business. He turned to Hans and asked where they were. He didn't waste any time. We're about 10 kilometers from the autonomous land of Teba, he said. Hans described how he had already been in touch with the folks in Teba before the kids even woke up and remained hopeful that help was on the way. Then, the dude pointed out that it was best for Karen and Leo to get the hell out of there, assuring him that his squad would hold the line. But then, out of the blue, Karan's weapon, the guillotine, signaled. He realized they weren't alone and that an ambush was looming. Karan wasn't in the mood to listen to Hans and quickly told him to get real. Sorry, we can't run run now. When Hans asked why, he hit him with the truth. Those guys just wrecked the Emperor's beautiful railway. That, my friend, is an act of rebellion. He thought about how far they could actually run from such bold guys. He turned to Leo and asked if he was still up for a fight, and Leo, all hyped up, confirmed he was ready to go. In the end, there was only one thing left to do. While one of the masked attackers danced around after a surprise hit, Karan popped up behind him with a big grin, declared it was time to take them all down, and charged in. The big boss of the attackers realized there were more defenders than he thought and started to sweat. And then Hans, blood in his eyes. He ordered the second squad to get out of the car and form a defensive line to protect the young masters. He filled Karan in, saying each of the enemies was at least 3-star level, and as Karan looked at their leader, he realized the guy exuded the aura of a 6-star fighter. The leader recognized him, calling him Carol Listum, and demanded he surrender and drop his weapon. Carol noticed the leader's voice was all distorted, as if he was casting some magic. Then, the boss offered to leave the knights and servants alone if he cooperated. From that, Carol understood their intention was to capture him alive. He asked Rance if he had any idea what that meant. Rance, catching on, begged Carol not to do it, but filled with courage, he shouted, "Why are you stopping me? If they can't kill me, then I'm the one who can end this." In the back, Rance sighed at his cousin's recklessness, while Hans ordered everyone to get ready for a fight to protect the young masters. And that's where the Battle of the Century began. The Listum Knights formed a protective circle around the young ones, fighting fiercely. The clash between the knights and the masked ones intensified, hitting hard without mercy. Carol, quick on the attacks, charged at the masked men, taking them down one by one and mocking their fear of getting close to him, even inviting, "Come on, bring it on!" The leader, signaling for his team to hold back, told his minions to stay quiet, saying he would handle Karan personally. Karan remarked that the boss had finally decided to show up, but Hans didn't hold back. "Back off, this is dangerous, man." The leader, all snobbish, laughed and called Hans a knight of the sea, saying he was running toward his death. Hans, undeterred, replied that they'd see who would be sucking their thumb and charged in, yelling with all his might. The fight between Hans and the leader began, and the guy launched a fierce attack, but Hans had to really push himself to block it. He was so amazed he almost let a powerful attack slip through. During the fight, Hans couldn't help but wonder if that guy had to be the 6-star knight from the Bava Sultanate. Hakimi was left wondering what that crazy guy was doing in the Empire's territory, especially with a non-aggression pact between them. Why the hell was he targeting the family? I mean, if there wasn't any beef between them. As confused as he was, Hans was determined to get to the bottom of things, especially since the young masters were also holding their ground. But in a moment of distraction, Hakime seized the opportunity and delivered a devastating blow to Hans. Hakime, all smug, laughed at Hans, saying he had let his focus slip, and that the knight's formation had turned into Swiss cheese. On fire with rage, Hans got back. Up, resolved to keep fighting, but Hakime didn't let up. He attacked again, saying resistance was pointless, and offered Hans the chance to surrender. Hakime looked around and saw that his crew had already fallen and that his formation had completely disintegrated. Being the nice guy, Hans offered Hakime and his men a chance to give up, promising no one would get hurt and questioning the cost of dying in a foreign land. Hakim firmly refused, insisting he would stick to his mission, and in an absurd twist, unleashed all of his power, causing his mana to shudder and retreat. Hans realized that Hakime didn't care about death, and that his reckless attitude was putting both young masters in a tight spot. Seeing no way out, our hero Hans decided he needed to shove his foot down on Hakime's reckless abandon and unleash all his power to take that nutcase down. At that critical moment, Karen's voice echoed through the chaos, expressing disappointment in Hans. Out of nowhere, Karen reminded Hans that his priority was to stop Hakime from causing more trouble. With that playful sarcasm of his, he asked if it was his turn to surrender now. Hakime turned around, and Karen, full of confidence, confirmed his name, proud to be Karen. And in the blink of an eye, the kid charged at Hakime and took him down with a fatal strike. As Hakime lay there taking his last breaths, he called the guy a monster. With a chilling smile, Hans thanked him for the compliment, but he was caught off guard. When he noticed his sword, the guillotine, vibrating again, he realized the danger wasn't over and accused the dying Hakime of having some trick up his sleeve. Hakime, not losing his cool, said he had no regrets and let out a cryptic apology. As an explosive energy started to envelop his body, Karen stood frozen, unable to believe what was happening. That's when Hans shouted for all the knights to protect Lord Leo, who was stuck in the middle of the battle, staring off into space. Without a second thought, Hans jumped in front of Karen to shield him from an incoming blast. Karen was shouting, asking what was going on, and Hans explained that Hakime had cast a self-destruct spell. As the explosion began, Hans apologized, with Karen feeling like everything that was happening was his fault. In those final moments, our hero Hans begged Karen to save his life, and then came a monstrous explosion, wrecking everything around them. In the chaos, Karen heard a mysterious voice call him a foolish human, the guy who dared to wake her up. The voice announced that since it had tasted Knight's blood for the first time in ages, it would do its part, advising Karen to shut his eyes tight to avoid having his eyeballs blown out. Once the smoke cleared, Karen found Hans unconscious on the ground and tried to wake him up. Hans came to, furious, scolding Karen for sacrificing himself to protect him, and Karen, with his usual coolness, replied by asking who asked to be saved like that. Another voice, coming from Karen's sword, interrupted their argument, mocking them and claiming that if it weren't for her, Karen wouldn't be be alive, and he should be grateful. Karen got really pissed off when he realized his sword was talking. He then looked around at the widespread destruction from the explosion and started pondering what had just happened. Aaron, curious, asked the sword if it was an ego sword, like those made from the souls of crazy blacksmiths. The sword was enraged by the comparison and threatened to slice Karen's neck off if he mentioned that again. Karen questioned why the sword saved him, if the first thing she wanted to do was kill him over something so trivial. The sword, still fuming, explained that she'd used all the mana she had saved up to save him from the blast, and that if it weren't for that, she would have already chopped his head off. Then the sword started complaining, as if it were worn out, wondering if there was another way to absorb mana besides fighting, suggesting maybe it could absorb mana from Karen's blood. Connecting the dots, he figured that if the sword craved the master's blood, it was definitely a demonic sword. At that moment, a group of knights showed up. The commander introduced himself as Haley, the commander of the self-defense forces of Teba. Hans wasted no time introducing himself to Haley. As the conversation went on, Karen decided to sheathe his sword, complaining that he couldn't talk while it was out. He heard Karen reply that it was a relief and it would be better for her to get some sleep in silence. Haley recognized Karen as the grandson of Duke Hallow Leaston and expressed that the region would take full responsibility for the mess that had happened. He explained that he was sent by the mayor to escort the members of the Cal family to safety. Karen agreed and asked him to take care of the many injured in the carriage. Hans turned to Karen and asked if he was sure he didn't want to head back to the castle of the Blue Sea, reminding him that danger could still be lurking and that the investigation would take time. Trying to reassure him, Hans insisted that he'd already talked to the medics and there was no reason for him to be so worried. He then changed the subject and asked Hans if he knew who the guy that blew himself up was, and Hans replied that the guy was Suin Hakimi, a 6-star knight from the Sultanate of Bava. Karen started to think about the seriousness of the situation, questioning whether the non-aggression pact his grandfather signed was in jeopardy. Leo admitted that the relationship between the Empire and the Sultanate was bad, but it didn't quite justify an attack like that. Carol concluded that Hakimi's freakout was reason enough to declare war. Inside the carriage, Carol caught Leo staring at his own blood-stained hands, totally in shock. Our hero Leo admitted that he had missed some parts of the earlier conversation with Karen while trying to make sense of the crazy situation, wondering why his hands were shaking like a tractor. Karen calmly explained that this reaction was normal since it was his first time killing someone. He bluntly said it was tough getting used to taking lives, but then added that Leo needed to get over that feeling because it's part of life, you know? A little while later, a guard announced that they would soon be arriving at the autonomous territory of Tempo. Things were about to get even crazier. As they entered the city, Karen looked out the window, getting more and more impressed. Alone with the opulence of the buildings, man, everything's so luxurious. The mayor, all excited, welcomes them warmly, relieved that they made it here safely. He promises that they'll do everything they can to find out who orchestrated the trouble and that they'll fully cooperate with the family's investigation. Listum, without wasting any time, jumps in, assuring the mayor that they already knew Teba had nothing to do with the attack. He sees the look of relief on the mayor's face at that moment. Hans starts commenting on how much the mayor has changed since his days as the finance minister. The mayor, feeling all nostalgic, expresses regret for taking this cursed mayoral job. He apologizes, all embarrassed, for speaking informally in front of the Duke's grandson and asks him to chill and speak casually because the formalities make him a bit uncomfortable. You know, the mayor hesitates, unsure about being informal with someone from such a noble lineage, but eventually he warms up to the idea. Karen quickly corrects himself after calling him by his first name to lighten the mood. The mayor suggests they move somewhere else and continue the chat in a more private vibe, like in a reserved room. Carol starts talking to the mayor, pointing out that the attackers used explosives and not just flood railways. He explains that explosives only come from the military supply admin, which is heavily controlled by the Empire, so smuggling them from there is nearly impossible. Karen proposes a theory, asking if there might have been a smuggling operation for explosives from outside the Empire, specifically from the Sultanate of Bava. He reminds the mayor that ultimately, the Empire and the Sultanate are the only ones capable of making top-quality explosives. Then he drops a bombshell, hinting that it would be pretty embarrassing for the mayor if Teba's merchants were somehow involved in this smuggling. The mayor is shocked by how spot-on Karen is. He realizes that if he doesn't agree with Karen's theory, he might be seen as an accomplice. So out of nowhere, he admits that the chance of smuggling is pretty high. Inside, the mayor is cursing those dumb smugglers. They really messed up with this tough situation. At this point, Karen remembers how the Seawolf Knights and the crew from the Blue Sea Castle got hurt in this incident. The mayor realizes he's in a tight spot since the Listum family is known for returning favors tenfold and collecting debts 100-fold. If he doesn't play along, he's going to be in big trouble. Trying to change the subject, the mayor asks how Karen's dad is doing. He mentions that he knows the guy well and is still close with Karen's maternal grandfather, the gay one. Karen smirks sarcastically, thinking that the mayor's sudden switch to familiar names shows he's just a typical politician. Suddenly, an assistant bursts into the room with some urgent news from the capital. The mayor thinks he knows what's coming. The Imperial Guard is on the way, but it's not just the Imperial Guard. The assistant shares that the commissioner from the Internal Revenue Service, the big boss himself, has headed out with the 1st Special Division toward Teba. The assistant reveals that the commissioner is Gaio Baraton, the famed demon king. As if the tension wasn't high enough, when the mayor hears the name Gaio, he's shocked and wonders if Sir Gaio is really coming here. He turns to Karen and asks if he knew about this, and Karen simply nods. He explains that his maternal grandfather cares about him so much, he would drop everything to save his grandson if the kid was in danger. That night, the forces of the 1st Special Division of the Internal Revenue Service arrived in Teba, and the atmosphere in the crowded streets was packed with pure tension. Commissioner Gaio Baraton, leading the troop, wore a serious expression that made it clear things were about to get messy. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Grand Duke Rilo was watching the whole scene unfold, having just arrived, and in this tense vibe, his aide comments on how quickly they got there, to which Rilo responds that it's a matter of the grandson. Meanwhile, the merchants of Teba are pissed and confused. They don't get why there's an unexpected tax investigation happening tonight, with no time to prepare. To make matters worse, they complain that the infamous 1st Special Division is leading the investigation. In the meeting room, the mayor was trying to calm everyone down when Karen and his group burst in. One of the older merchants supports the mayor, emphasizing just how serious the situation really is. Karen turns to the merchants, explaining how serious the situation is. He reminds them that not only did the Emperor's railway go up in smoke, but also the grandson of the Grand Duke and the crew from the Blue Castle got attacked. He adds that the whole mess was made with explosives that were probably smuggled in by the trade guilds from Teba, asking if they are finally getting how serious this is. The merchants, completely at a loss, try to backtrack and say they just asked for more time to get organized. Karen goes straight for the merchant who is speaking, introducing himself as Viscount Homer from the Homer Trading Group. Karen calmly says he'll personally take the Viscount's name to his grandfather at the National Tax Service. The Viscount is shocked and begs Karen to reconsider, confessing he spoke without thinking. That's when things heated up. The Special 1st Division and the Commissioner showed up in full force, and our guy Gaio, along with his crew, announced that the tax investigation was kicking off now for all trading groups. He dropped that the tax folks got some serious reports about dirty money linked to smuggling and tax evasion, and believe it or not, even the Emperor pushed for an investigation and demanded full cooperation from everyone. And Leo, super curious, whispered to Hans if that Special 1st Division thing was really that intense. Hans explained that this division was like the elite investigators dealing with high-profile merchants and nobles, and depending on how things went down, they could even call in the Imperial Guard. Definitely something to be respected, confirming that they were the real deal. Soon after, Gaio got up close and had a private chat with her, remembering it had been 3 years since they last saw each other. Moments later, Gaio and Karen were having a heart-to-heart. There, Gaio asked if her grandson, who happens to be Karen, was doing all right, and the girl, completely chill, said yes. He went on to ask if she suspected anyone, but Karen shook her head. When Gaio brought up the possibility of it being a family issue, Karen dismissed it right away, saying if her uncles were guilty, they wouldn't have left a trace, not even a thread. He explained that the guys behind this mess, they left clues on purpose, like they wanted it to look like a job from the Sultanate of Baba. Then Gale asked Carol if she was planning on hunting down the culprits herself, and you can just guess the council's response. Dude, you probably shouldn't do that. He reminded her that the world is big and filled with powerful people, and the danger was still out there, lurking. So, he told her to chill for now, because they were heading to the capital the next morning, all this while enjoying the Emperor's hospitality. He said goodbye to her, assuring her that the adults would handle all this mess. Karen nodded with a little smirk, promising he would behave. And as if that weren't enough, Gale added that, actually, it was Karen who asked him to come up with some excuse to delay him and keep an eye on him. But as Gale walked away, he thought a blackout was going to happen, and realized Karen never intended to keep that promise. That night, at someone named Owen's house, people were in a rush, hastily loading a carriage. His worried wife asked if he was going with them. Owen calmed her down, saying he would follow soon, telling the carriage to leave while his family was calling for him. Owen stood there, feeling down, cursing the situation. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Grand Duke Hallow Liston was on a rooftop, acting like a spy, watching everything. One of his goons showed up and said the targets had started to move, so Hallow Liston ordered them to speed up the cleanup and do it quickly and without mistakes. Meanwhile, Karen was in his room sharpening his sword in the middle of the night. Zeras, who had just arrived, interrupted and asked if she was planning on causing trouble again. Carol, as always, shared the scoop she'd heard from Gaio, who had forbidden her to go out, and asked if Zeras was going to try as well. Zeras was just there to deliver a message from the head of the family, Grand Duke Hallow Liston, and my friend, he recited the order for Karen, the youngest heir of the Lestine family. Upon receiving this order, you must find the culprits immediately and demand blood for the dead. Zeras ended by emphasizing that Karen should make it clear what the law of the Blue Castle means. Hearing that, Karen just smiled slyly and said he would do what the head of the family commanded. Zeras remarked that the night was definitely going to be long. Later on, Caron's gang and Leo were wandering through the eastern districts of Teba, all disguised, you know? And Leo was just complaining, asking why he had to be the servant in this whole situation, especially in a place that's crawling with trafficking problems. Karen tried to explain that two nobles roaming around without any escort would definitely raise eyebrows and unnecessary suspicions. Even though Leo got the point, he was still grumbling about being the only one stuck playing the Kemcha's servant role. They talked about human warmth, saying they were getting close to the spot Zeras mentioned. Leo, all jittery, noticed the place looked really sketchy, not exactly fitting for young nobles. And Karen, of course, couldn't help but tease him, asking if he wanted to go home if he was scared. Suddenly, a guy popped up in front of them, asking what they were doing there. Carol didn't waste any time, stepped forward, and greeted him, saying they were messengers from Sarah's Eras. The guy, feeling feeling all important, welcomed them, and said it was an honor to serve the young masters. He revealed his face and introduced himself as Julio, suggesting they head to a safe house he had set up. Inside the safe house, Julio started talking about how the place had all sorts of listening devices to keep their conversation private. Caron, being from the city, asked how he became an informant for the Listum family. Julio explained that he was returning a favor to Saraceras from when he was just a kid. Karen got straight to the point, making it clear they had intel on a plan to attack the Listum family, involving weapon smuggling and info about their trip to the capital. He then asked Julio if he knew who was behind it, and Julio confirmed that he did. Our hero explained that, based on the info he had gathered, there were only two teams in the black market dealing with explosives, the Kerr group and the Caligo group. But then he mentioned that the Kerr group was almost out of the area and wondered what was up with the Caligo group. Julio replied that it was a crew full of former slaves who would take any shady deal as long as the pay was good. Then Julio dropped a bombshell. He had heard that the Caligo crew had hit the road earlier that day, and that left Karen in shock. He realized that, man, if those guys left right around the time of the attack, it looks really suspicious. Caron started weighing the options. The group was ready to bail, and the Caligo crew was packed with desperate lunatics. The big brain in the group mentioned that time was running out to hit both crews and asked what their next move was. Carol flashed that mischievous smile and said, "Dude, the answer's simple. Those with nothing to lose are the most dangerous." So, they decided to head to Caligo, and Julio promised to take them straight to the black market. Meanwhile, we cut to Mayor Glim, chatting with Commissioner Gayo. Glim brought up whether Gayo was really okay with letting Caron run wild. Gayo replied that since his son-in-law, Grand Duke Ralph, had sent a message, he couldn't say no. He also mentioned that anyone who understands wolves knows how to deal with them. Gayo revealed a little secret. Karen herself had asked him to come up with any excuse to keep her from getting involved and out of his way. Even though Glim admired Nito's boldness, he was annoyed remembering that the girl was only 13. Gayo brushed it off, saying that Karen had proven she's tough, and when it comes to geniuses, age is just a detail. But Glim insisted that Teba is a place where danger pops up out of nowhere, and that some groups there were buying off politicians in the capital to expand their influence. He added that while Duke Hallow Liston stayed at the border, the noble families in the capital were keeping an eye on the Listum family, and Teba was full of people who would do anything to please. Gayo explained that that's why an emperor had gotten involved in Teba, to prevent selfish folks from taking over the empire. Then he dropped a bomb. Is it better to be more, or just exist in Teba? Glim was like, "Are you nuts? He's talking about the actual indestructible shield with 8 stars. Back to Caron and her crew. They finally reached the entrance of the black market in Caligo. Julio confirmed it was the only door, and said that in emergencies, it could be bolted from the inside, which Caron thought was pretty hardcore. As they were gearing up to head down, they ran into a line of guards who had captured and tied Julio up. One of the guards told Julio they weren't taking customers that day by order of the boss, and told them to turn back. When Julio asked why, the guard said he didn't know and politely asked them to leave. When they kept insisting, the guard pulled out his sword in a threatening way. Karen coldly challenged the guard, telling him to go ahead and draw the sword and see what would happen. The guard hesitated, and Julio, panicking, begged Karen to calm down. That's when Karen turned to Leo, who was disguised as a snitch, and told him to make Plan B happen. Leo, totally lost and racking his brain, realized that they never actually had a Plan B. So guys, did you like this? If so, smash that like button to help this video out.